Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Gender and Development Studies, SOGDS, Diploma Postgraduate Diploma Programs. Postgraduate Diploma in Women's and Gender Studies, PGDWGSR MWG 001 Theories of Women and Gender Studies. Block-2 Women and in Movements. Unit-1 Peasant and Working Class Feminism. 1.1 Introduction. The dominant stereotype that persists in society is that men are producers and women are reproducers. According to August Babel, 1975, p.4, women are the first human beings to taste bondage and women were the first slaves. Scholars like Maria Mies, 1998, and Gail Omved, 1977, have explored the life worlds of peasant women, the subjective and objective dimensions of the peasant women's conditions are important, and it will help you to understand their affinities or detachments related to peasant movements. 1.2 Objectives. After completing this unit, you will be able to times explain the formation and historical background of peasant and working class women in India. Times state the trajectory of the various movements based on peasant and working class, and Times analyze the social stratifications that determine the assertion of peasant and working class women. 1.3 Defining peasant and working class. It is important to understand the concepts related to the categories such as peasantry and working class. This exercise that engages with the definitions of these categories will help us to locate the linkages that exist between gender and the peasantry and working class. The category of peasant is contested. It refers to diverse sections such as sharecroppers, rich smallholders, landless laborers, and sections such as feudal tenants. These are dealt with in the Marxist theoretical tradition. The revolutionary agency of the peasantry is very much part of the Marxian analysis. Marxist scholars link feudal tenants to the world of peasant economies. This approach explores the conditions that determine the location of rural day laborers, feudal tenants, and independent farmers. Peasants and their life worlds are explored in the context of consumption production, capitalist non-capitalistic agriculture, and the exploitation of impoverished producers in agriculture. The mode of production plays a vital role in the class location of peasant. Anthropological readings on peasantry focus on the role of norms and values, predicaments on tradition, nature of vision, and so on. In other words, norms, values, tradition, and vision of peasantry are studied in the field of anthropology. The working class is the class which has to sell its labor power for survival. Marx called this category as the proletariat. The sale of labor power within a particular time determines the wage of the laborer. But there are differences in the category of working class based on market conditions and work. The labor contract too decides the nature of the subordinate location of the working class. Blue-collar occupations and manual jobs determine the social space of working class. The working class is not a homogeneous category. Rather, there are differences in the location and social mobility of the working class. Skill determines the social mobility of the working class. Those who are skilled are more privileged than the unskilled. The section that exists between skilled and unskilled are the semi-skilled. Those who are part of the primary market and secondary market also have a different trajectory. Changing needs and demands in labor market result in poverty. Primary market and secondary markets are the two entities of labor market. Primary market is determined by the requirements of the workers. It has good jobs with career prospects. It also has proper pension schemes, full-time employment and good pay. Those who are part of the primary labor market are socially mobile and better paid than those who work in the secondary labor market. The primary labor market is composed of skilled laborers. On the other hand, secondary market provides low social mobility, part-time jobs. It does not provide pension. Those workers in the secondary market are vulnerable to multiple forms of exploitation and exclusion. The marginalized sections are very much part of the secondary labor market. For instance, workers who belong to the subordinate classes, castes, races, and gender are part of the secondary labor market. They do not have the access to paid vacations, standardized labor contracts, pensions and entitlements, and other forms of social security. Unemployment and underemployment are the salient features of those workers who are situated within the secondary labor market. The working class in the first world faces the threat of automation. Rapid technological changes call into question the day-to-day work of the laborers. The primary markets and manufacturing sectors also undergo rapid changes in the developing society. The shrinking of those sectors affects the working class in such countries. Scholars who belong to the School of Subaltern Studies position the category of peasant in a different theoretical fashion. Ranjit Guha, 1983, one of the path-breaking founders of the school, emphasized the historiography of the peasant and peasant insurgency in colonial India as seen from below. Thus, a subaltern study rereads the peasant, subaltern, resistance and its representation in the colonial historiography. Subaltern studies focused on the impact of caste system in agrarian milieu and resistance. It explored the dimensions of peasants and their movements in the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial period. Subaltern is a category that signifies subordination. Parth Chatterjee is one of the important scholars who contributed to the field of subaltern studies. He provided the subaltern interpretation of the peasant world and caste system. He criticized the Marxian analysis of the peasantry as a particular way of reading that reduces the caste system to a superstructural epiphenomenon. He contended that this reading was a particular kind of Marxist distortion. According to Parth Chatterjee, 1983, both base and superstructure contribute to the shaping of caste system. He argues that religion acts as a form of consciousness, which helps the subalterns to oppose the dominant forces. For instance, Mayan peasants in the Chiapas of Mexico argue that they are people of corn. In other words, corn stands for their struggle. Tom Brass, 1991, criticized subaltern studies for its construction of rural producers as uniform, and he equates it with the approach of populism. Three agencies such as Sarkari, government, Sahukari, money lending, and Zmindari, landlordism, controlled the lives of the peasants in India. These agencies are active in the exploitation of the peasantry. However, the peasantry in contemporary neoliberal India is experiencing the retreat of state from agriculture, lack of proper policies, the penetration of capitalist forces in the field of agriculture, NGOization, and the consequential depoliticization of peasant agency, recurring suicides in agrarian communities, rapid technological change, and so on. Now that we have obtained some understanding of the categories of peasant and working class, let us look at these within a historical perspective in the next section. 1.4 History of Peasant and Working Class. Feminism. In the section above, we learnt about how the categories of peasant and working class have been defined by various scholars in the field. In this section, we will examine these categories in a historical framework as well as in relationship to women and feminism. Some of the issues to be covered here include the condition of Indian women, their relationship to labor and to agriculture, the independence-related struggle about the peasantry in our country took place in 1857. It was an organized feudal peasant struggle against the colonizers that was led by feudal lords. The emergence of leadership among peasants happened only after the formation of Kisan Sabhas. Uday Mehta, 1979, has classified peasant movements in terms of the following 3 phases. 1. Initial phase, the sporadic growth of peasant movements in the absence of organized and proper leadership emerged in the period 1857 to 1921. 2. Second phase, during the period 1923 to 46, an organized form of Kisan Sabhas created consciousness among the peasants. The salient feature is that peasant movements were led by people and they gave importance to the problems of peasant in the national question. 3. Post-independence phase, agrarian movements became assertive due to the ruling party's incompetence to foreground the problems of Indian peasantry. It was broadly mobilized by leftist parties, and in the late 70s and 80s, it became the discourse of some other autonomous farmers' organization, cited in Solomon, 1982, p.3. The tremendous peasant assertions, according to Maria Mies, is a part of the deepening economic crisis which affects the peasants and more brutally than urban middle class, Mies, 1976, p.472. The agendas of the peasant movements were land to the tiller, higher prices for farm produces, right of farmers' loans, and so on. Militant peasant assertions were neutralized by clashes, firings, and deaths. 1.4.1 Tracing Indian women's location in the social system. The social stratification of women in India is contested. They are fragmented on the basis of class, caste, region, sexual orientation, and so on. The condition of women in India is determined by the ambiguous overlapping of class and caste, the specificity of their location that is determined by caste and class accelerate the divisiveness and the lack of solidarity among them. They are situated at 2 levels of existence. One is that both of them are oppressed by the patriarchal ideology that is prevalent in India. The second one is that they also belong to different classes and castes. There are divisions within the caste and it intersects with class in a complicated fashion. Women who belong to different classes and castes internalize the dominant ideology of caste and class and become the victims of a persisting patriarchal ideology that is conditioned through caste and class. Thus, they reproduce a sense of false consciousness related to the supposed superiority and inferiority of their social worlds. The sense of superiority and inferiority of their specific caste class locations also decides their sexual social labor. It is important to understand the contestations of labor and women in India. 1.4.2 Women and Labor. As we mentioned earlier, the social stratification of class and caste determines the nature of the women proletariat in India. It also determines the social recognition of labor. In other words, the labor of women is recognized through their social location. Nature of work determines the dignity and social mobility of the individual and communities. The situation is different in developing societies such as India. The social mobility of women in India is linked to caste and class stratification. The patriarchal ideology in India becomes an obstacle to the empowerment of women. There are links that exist between caste, class, and gender. For instance, a woman who belongs to the higher class caste strata of India is more socially mobile than the women who belong to the Adivasi and Dalit communities. Constitutional privileges in India have made an impact on the rights and privilege of the marginalized communities such as Dalits and TR1BILs. Still, they are marginalized from the mainstream milieu of power due to the persistence of caste. It will be interesting to understand the relationship of caste class and gender through the social trajectory of the gendered class caste proletariat of India. For instance, midwives and washer women in India belong to the lower caste class. Their labor is conditioned through the caste class-ridden labor environment. Women from higher castes will never involve themselves in the stigmatized caste class-bound labor or occupations. Their labor thus is determined themselves through their social location in the caste class hierarchy. 1.4.3 Politics, Agency and Women in India. Post-independent and pre-colonial India has witnessed a diverse political agency of plural and unequal women. In other words, the emergence of political agency in these two broader periods, that is pre-colonial and post-independent, is different in India. It is different because the existential predicaments of women belonging to different classes and castes are different in nature. It is unequal in nature due to their diverse social backgrounds. For instance, women who belonged to the higher strata in India participated in the freedom struggle against the British colonialism. It is interesting to note the distinctive nature of the political agency and the social milieu of those women. Women leaders like Sarojini Naidu represent a different trajectory from the women activists from the Dalit and tribal communities. They have a different perspective of the oppressor. Marginalized women had to face double oppression based on internal caste colonialism and external British colonialism. Thus, the stake of these marginalized women activists was distinct from leaders such as Sarojini Naidu. On the other hand, leaders such as Sarojini Naidu exemplify the path-breaking women's political agency which was only aimed at the abolition of the British colonial imperial rule. The difference in the political agency of women and its complexity can be found in the section on the history of the political agency of women. 1.4.4 Agrarian Conditions and Impact on Women. John P. Mencher and K. Sardmoni argued that no one has ever measured the amount of paddy harvested by a woman and that harvested by a man. In those parts of Kerala where harvesting is paid by a share of what is harvested, usually 1 to 6, one tends to find a larger proportion of harvesting done by females. Still, we have never heard a complaint from a landowner that women were not good at harvesting, or any claim that males could harvest more in a given period of time. Mencher and Sardamni, 1982. p. 155, The stereotype that men are better at agricultural work is conditioned by the patriarchal ideology that is prevalent in the field of peasantry. The absence of women friendly implements as well as tools that can redeem women from their mundane and tiresome labor is important and vital to end their exclusion from the labor that is determined by the patriarchal division of labor. Thus, it is practical to have new tools as well as implementations to gender their social milieus. The current status of women in the realm of agriculture impedes their agency as well as social mobility. In other words, they are not skilled in the area of agriculture except in using the plough. For instance, women who work in the farm are devoid of skills. They do not get a proper wage. Thus, they are exploited on a large scale. There is a dearth of proper training for women and thus they are marginalized from key aspects related to agriculture. They are forced to remain in a lesser position in their families, community, and farms. Landless women are different from the aforementioned class caste of women. Their status is totally different because they do not have technical skills and training. Simultaneously, their identities that are constructed through their caste cum class determine their growth. In the section below, we will look more closely at the role of women in peasant and working class feminist discourse through women's movements. 1.5 Contribution of women in peasant and working class feminist discourse. Through movements, women participated in the Bodhgaya struggle for the land. They were mobilized by the Chhatra Yuva Sangharsh Vahini, which is influenced by the ideology of Jayaprakash Narayan. The land was appropriated by Bodhgaya Math. The Sangharsh Vahini organized a demonstration of local laborers and peasants against the Bodhgaya Math authorities. 24 women from the different cities of Bihar participated in it. The slogan was, "Those who sow and plough the land are the owners of the land." Manimala, 1984. The land was under the control of Mahant. It is important to understand the history of the Mahant system. The Shankar math is another name for the Bodhgaya math. It is named as Shankar math because it was reconstructed by a person called Shankar. Mehendi tradition started after Ghamande became the Mahat in 1590 AD. The math became a renowned tantric center in the 17th century. Krishnadayal Giri, the Mahant, transferred all the math property, which was in his name, to a trust in 1932. He was the president of it. Dhansut Giri became the Mahat in 1977. Internal conflicts were high during that period. All administrative rights were given to Darbari Jairam Giri due to the deteriorating health of previous Mahat Shatanand Giri. However, Jairam Giri divided the math into 20 trusts and he became the president of the working committee of those trusts. It resulted in the conflict between the Mahat and the Darbaris. But they were all together in the case of the appropriation of the land from the poor. They used all sorts of coercive measures to grab the land of the poor. These lands were controlled through Bodhgaya math and its Kacheri. 53 Kacheris existed in Gaya that time. It was managed by Sannyasi, known as Mudya. He was the representative of the math. He is appointed by a Mahat. Math employed permanent laborers called Kamya. They work in the fields of the math and were given 15 kathas of land for cultivation. They were also paid for that work. The math never gave them any receipts, and they were not able to claim their rights under sharecropping laws. The Mahants occupied 9,575 acres of land in 138 villages in 11 areas of Gaya district. Women were exploited by those who were part of the math. At this juncture, laborer activists decided to reap lentil for themselves. Rather than giving it to the math in November 1978, the decision was made public by the activists. The lumpen brigade of the math surrounded the entire field. But courageous women entered the field and reaped the crop. Thus, women initiated the first political activity in Bodh Gaya. It attracted women to that movement. They were conscious of the patriarchy that was very much part of their day-to-day life. They socially boycotted men who beat their wives. They were not allowed to sit in the village meetings. Women were successful in an anti-liquor agitation because they realized that alcoholism affects the financial condition of women. They were active in stopping liquor brewing. Thus, they created consciousness among women, men and children about the impacts of alcoholism. Women helped the laborers who were brutally attacked by ruffians of the math on 8th August 1979. Women protested against the atrocities of landlords. Women argued that their struggle have two dimensions: the right to land and the right to equality. Women challenged the police during the protest related to land. They were brutally beaten up by the police during the protest in 5. At November 1980. Government identified the land that was illegally possessed by the math in October 1981 and decided to distribute the land to landless laborers in places like Kush, Munesarpur, Chakla, Jairampur, Parsava, Gosa Pesra and Kurmwa. Women argued that the land should be legally in their names. This is one of the significant moments in the history of the land struggle in Bodh Gaya. They did gherao in front of the officers and raised this question. The Tebhaga movement of sharecroppers started in undivided Bengal in 1946-47. It started after the Great Famine of 1943. The sharecroppers of that particular region did not have occupancy rights. They faced threats of eviction. The landlord exploited them by taking their produce. They also levied illegal cess from the sharecroppers. At the same time, women were exploited by the landlords. The main slogan of this movement was "Land to the Tiller." It demanded a reduction in land rents from 1/2 to 1/3 of the crop share. It was organized by Bengal Provincial Kisan Sabha, BKPS. It was led by Communist Party of India. Women's Self-Defense League or MAS, Mahila Atma Raksha Samiti, was also part of the struggle. It is important to understand the formation of MAS. It was founded in the year 1942. It was linked to the mobilization of Bengali women on the eve of Bengal famine. It gained its strength in 1943. 5,000 women from Calcutta and its suburban regions conducted a hunger march to the Bengal Legislative Assembly to protest against the hike in prices. They also conducted marches in small towns of Bengal. It had branches in every district. By May 1994, there was membership of 43,500 women belonging to working class, peasant, middle class, urban poor sections. Oppression on the basis of gender is related to caste, economy-based oppression and agrarian conditions. Caste Hindu landlords regulated the lives of the women from sharecropping households. Those women experienced sexual exploitation from the land lords. It is argued that rural poor women faced the worst conditions. Both Hindu and Muslim women were very much part of this struggle. Women acted as the informers for the activists of the movement. They informed the activists about the arrival of the police. They made sounds or blew conch shells. They gave shelter and food to activists. Women also become messengers of the activists who worked in the market and other areas. There were Nari Bahinis or Mohilla Bahinis, women's corps, to protect the village. Women who belonged to poor sections were active in meetings and demonstration. They were also the members of the Tebhaga committee. These women were courageous and resisted arrests. They rescued people bravely. They used household devices used for husking, chopping woods, brooms, and knives to resist the attack of the police. They resisted the landlords who were harvesting paddy with the help of the police. Women used mixture of dust and chili powder to attack the police. Many women were killed and got injured during the attacks of the police. They protested against wife beating in the Tebhaga peasant courts and branches of Mars. They argued that wife beating questions the integrity of the movement. Against the landlords, their campaign against domestic violence provided new dimensions to the Tebhaga movement. Some of the peasants in the Muslim areas objected to the presence of women in the Kisan Samitis. Women argued that they also were part of the labor in the agrarian field and protested against such move by the males. However, it is argued that women were not part of the key bodies of BPKS or Communist Party. Women's right to land was not discussed in an appropriate manner. The Telangana struggle started in the year 1945. It was an armed struggle organized by the Communist Party of India in the rural part of Andhra Pradesh against the feudal regime. It stood for the cause of providing land to the peasant cultivators. It demanded hike in wages. It also addressed the abolition of forced labor and sexual exploitation of women. 3 million men and women belonging to 3,000 villages of the several districts of Telangana participated in this struggle. Landlords during the Nizam period exploited women. They sexually exploited women from the poor and vulnerable sections. They were kidnapped by the landlords. They were forced to submit themselves to the sexual advance of the landlords. Those women who were part of this movement belonged to landless and middle-class peasant backgrounds. They joined the movement to solve their land-related issues. It was also an attempt to come out of the structure of oppressive family. Women in Andhra Pradesh participated in the Telangana struggle and challenged the barbaric rule of Razakars during 1948 to 1950. They were active in rallies and strikes. Men found refuge in the forests for their activism. During the bitter days of repression, women remained in the family. Women used chili powder, slings and pestles to defend themselves. Women carried messages by disguising themselves as boys. 10,000 women participated in this struggle. They were repressed by the police. They were also brutally raped by the police and the landlords. But leaders of Telangana showed a paternalistic attitude to women's question. Women were not allowed to work as guerrillas and asked to work as messengers, providing shelter and So on. Male leaders considered women as not capable of fighting with arms. They admitted that they were not interested to take women to the battle field. Thus, women who were part of the Telangana were alienated from the dominant patriarchal leadership. During Telangana, women guerrilla committees were formed and women fought against the Razakars of Nizam. Razakars were the private Muslim militia of Nizam. Some of them who were part of the guerrilla wing were asked to go back to family after the struggle. For instance, women were considered as a supportive part of the Communist Party. A few among them only become party members. Women argue that they did everything for the struggle like their male counterparts. But they were not given membership in the party. Women were watched by the male activists. They were criticized by the male activists for their mistakes. The question of separate land titles to women, domestic violence, dowry were never discussed in the party. It will be interesting to understand the role of women activists of Telangana. Struggle through the life histories of some of those of women activists. Mallu Swarajam is one of the pioneering women activists who left an indelible mark in the history of Telangana struggle. She was a vibrant guerrilla strategist, commander and Communist Party organizer of Telangana movement. She argued that she worked in the post-independent Communist Party as an extension of her guerrilla spirit. She was born in 1930 in a feudal family of Andhra Pradesh. She was part of the freedom movement at an early age. She was vocal about the inequality that determined the lives of the poor. Her mother influenced her humanist attitude. Swarajam was influenced by Gandhiji and the Salt Satyagraha. Russian writers such as Maxim Gorky made an impact on her revolutionary perceptions. She used to read the banned newspaper of the Communist Party called Prajashakti. Swarajam attended the political class in the house of Arutla Kamala Devi, an activist of member of Andhra Mahila Sabha. That political class focused on playing and stick fighting. She listened to the debates on the movement against forced labor from that class. Her family was against her affiliation with the Sabha. Her political activism was also linked to the Andhra Mahasabha's struggle against the dictatorial rule of the Nizam of Hyderabad. The Mahasabha declared political solidarity with oppressed caste, indigenous communities and their struggle against the feudal system. Her political activism had a cultural dimension too. She politicized the genre of cradle song called Vuyalo as part of consciousness raising. This particular genre was popular among the different castes and classes of rural Telangana region. These radical forms of Varyalis created a new sense of revolutionary rigor among the comrades. One of her, Vijayalu, was about the cruelty of landlord Visnur Deshmukh Ramchandra Reddy, in which she narrated the plight of a peasant woman after her childbirth. It also dealt with the obstacles to care of her child. This song thus deals with the feudalism, oppression and its impact on a peasant woman. The peasant lady requests the landlord to allow her to take care of her child. But the landlord sends his militia to physically harass her. This song explored the politics of feudalism and land relations. It dealt with the nuances of labor and suppression. This song advocated the oppressed to join the political collective that addresses the plight of toiling masses. Swarajam became the member of Andhra Mahila Sabha, the women's wing of the Mahasabha in the year 1942 when she was 12 years old. This particular moment of her life signifies her passion for the revolutionary praxis. The peasant assertions of this particular moment was influenced by the struggle of a Dalit woman named Alamma against encroachment of her land by landlord Visnur Deshmukh in the year 1944. Swarajyam became the member of the Communist Party in 1946. Peasants were organized as village squads. Later, they were converted to guerrilla squads. Communists in Telangana under the leadership of P. Sundaraya mobilized the peasants and formed Gram Raj. It annihilated the practices such as forced labor, usury and evictions. It also increased the wages for the workers. Swarajyam became the organizer for the struggle committee of Suryapet Taluka in 1946. The committee was responsible to provide training to men and women. Their objective was to convert them into fighting units called Dalams. Women were part of the land distribution committee. There were two women in that community. Swarajyam became a member of Women's Committee which focused on women's rights in 1945. It resisted wife beating, alcoholism and provided support to the women who suffered from patriarchal families. There were women's fighting units under the Communist Party. Swarajyam taught the activists how to escape themselves from the enemy. She was part of the successful struggle against the cruel landlords. She became the committee organizer for the tribal areas. She was an active guerrilla in the Godavari forest region during 1948 to 51. This movement restored the land rights of the Koyati Awanbialas of that region. Swarajyam provides a new insight that addresses the questions of gender, working class and the oppressed peasantry. Women played a role in environmental movements. They were assertive in the Chipko movement. It emerged in the Gadwal hills of northwest India. The Chipko movement was an innovative way to prevent the cutting of trees. It was against the exploitation of forest that was owned by the government and the forest department and emerged in the year 1973. One village woman protested against the logging of a tract of oak forest related to the potato seed farm. Women protested because it would result in the loss of their source of fuel and fodder and would add 5 kilometers to their journey for firewood. Women took the initiative to start vigilance against illegal felling. They also protested against the tree auctions. They also opposed alcoholism and domestic violence. They were conscious that their daily life was dependent on trees. Thus, women become more active in village meetings. Women achieved allotment of a part of the village wasteland in a Save Mandir project in Rajasthan in the 1980s. They planted herbs and plants. But they faced opposition from the local government officials. There was no provision of a land registration related to women. Women in the Bankura region of West Bengal organized samitis or societies for the reclaiming of the waste land for sericulture, which was started in 1988. There were 1,500 women from 36 villages. They formed a society of their own. Landless women in Bangladesh too cultivated crops in the wasteland. Women were part of the landless laborers movement in Karimnagar district. During the 60s, they started agitating against the kidnapping of Devamma and the murder of her husband by a local landlord. In Kerala, women were organized under Kisan Sabhas and the All Kerala Mahila Sangam. They were an active part of conscience building, supporting the underground activities of fellow revolutionaries and so on. Women became martyrs during their struggle against the diabolic activities of the Devan, Sir C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer. Sushila Gopalan is one of the pioneering woman communist leaders. She is renowned for her mobilization of workers who were part of coir manufacturing units. She played an important role in the foundation of the Coir Workers' Cooperative Society. She started the Coir Workers Center in 1971. She was the president of that center. There were women leaders from the Adivasi and Dalit communities of Kerala. Mailamma is one of the brilliant Adivasi women leaders from Kerala. She fought against the Coca-Cola plant at Plachimada. The struggle in Plachimada symbolized the agency of Adivasi women and their struggle to reclaim their right to water. Natives of Plachimada faced an acute shortage of water after the installation of the Coca-Cola plant. Mailamma mobilized the indigenous communities and faced brutal repression from the Poliskam political party nexus of Kerala. She died on 6 January 2007. C.K. Janu is another prominent woman leader from the Adivasi community of Kerala. She founded the social movement called Adivasi Gotra Mahasabha, AGMS. She is one of the contemporary icons of the Adivasi assertion in Kerala who succeeded in creating a Dalit-Adivasi alliance. She faced oppression from the police during her struggle for land rights at Muthanga. The emergence of Janu as a political leader symbolized the political consciousness of Adivasi women, which is based on the ideology of right to land and natural resources. Her movement became a pressure group within the political sphere of Kerala. In Punjab, poor peasant woman Raghubir Kaur was elected to the Punjab Assembly in 1937. She mobilized peasant women in the rural areas. In March 1943, an All-Indian Kisan Sabha held a separate conference for women. Sikh as well as Muslim women participated in it. The Varli Peasant uprising happened in Thane, Maharashtra in the 1940s. Godavari Parulekar was a prominent woman activist in this uprising. Tribal Bhil laborers in Shahda, Dhulia district in Maharashtra were also part of the tribal resistance against the exploitative landlords. Bhil women were also part of the anti-alcohol agitation at Shahda in 1972. They entered liquor dens and destroyed all bottles of liquor. They were vocal about the drinking attitudes and oppressive character of their husbands. They also challenged the lumpins who were employed on the liquor barons. Women who were part of different trades in the informal economy were mobilized by the Self-Employed Women's Association, SEVA. This was founded by Ella Bhatt in the year 1972. She worked with the Gandhian women trade union called Textile Labor Association. There are different views on the conditions of sex workers. On the one hand, their social location is determined by their labor and specific gender identity. At the same time, they are marginalized laborers who are involved in stigmatized sex-related labor linked to the commoditization of the bodies of the women. The stereotypes about them could not help them to transcend their stigmatized past even after their rehabilitation. Thus, rehabilitation is questioned through the complicated nature of sex work, stigma, gender, class, labor, and so on. It is important to understand that there are differences in the opinion of the sex worker activists. For instance, Darbar Mahila Samanvaya Committee's Sex Workers Manifesto deals with the various dimensions of the sex workers' assertions. They argue that sex workers' movement have raised questions about social systems and determinations, interconnected milieus of class, gender and sexuality, and ethics of politics morality. They began with a biographical sketch of their movement. It emerged as a collective of health workers of STD HIV intervention program at Sonagachi, Calcutta in the year 1992. Sonagachi is one of the largest and oldest red light areas of Calcutta. Initially, that program created a sense of belonging and support among them. It helped them to look at themselves as a collective force whose lives are determined by specific social, ideological, and political conditions. They contend that the distribution of condoms and the idea of safe sex is related to nuances of their lives that are determined by their customers, pimps, and related other antisocial elements. This manifesto also deals with how the nature of motherhood, ideologies of love, and coupledom affect the sexual behavior. They asserted that they founded Darbar Mahila Samanvaya Committee as an exclusive forum for sex workers. It was a forum to engage with their experiences and to articulate material marginality and societal ostracization. They declared their identity as sex workers in public spaces. They made their deliberations on the potentials and pitfalls of sex work. They opined that sex work is an occupation, not a moral condition. They are vocal about the developmental agencies that patronize their subjectivity. They are critical about the politics of rehabilitation that do not understand the complexities of their lives. They also argued that they are exposed to the moral policing of the society. According to them, society views sex workers as a homogenized category that provides sex-related services. They consider these sort of perceptions as reductionist and detrimental to their lives. They are considered a threat to public health, societal order, sex related morality, and the civic system. They are conscious of being objects of pity, excluded from the dominant paradigms of citizenship. A sex worker is more oppressed than any other worker due to the above-mentioned labor and gender-bound specificities. They also expose the cultural industry as one which reproduces the ideology of women as a sexual object. The same ideology influences the human search for desires that are not confined to the categories of monogamy. They believe in a democratized family rather than the oppressive family which reproduces categories such as chaste wife and fallen women. They argue that their labor is equal to that of any other labor. They are different in the case of physical labor, occupational hazards such unwanted pregnancy, sex-related diseases, and so on. It is part of their livelihood. Their movement redefines perceptions about gender, poverty, sexuality, and so on. It also provides them material and symbolic aspects related to their life worlds. Questions related to nuances of labor power affect the life chances of those who engage in sex work. This question has not been explored by this group in a detailed manner. However, it is also contended as a political collective against the repressive patriarchal ideology that stereotypes them as fallen women. Male sex workers are also part of this movement. Women in Nepal were oppressed due to the excessive involvement of men in their public life. They were oppressed in every respect. Most of their activities were under the surveillance of the Nepali men. Women demanded a separate space for their meeting. They got allotted it from the panchayat in the year 1988. For instance, Nepali Bidi workers' struggle was against the Devdasi system. Thus, it stood for the self-dignity related to women and work. In the above section, you have obtained a comprehensive view on the important role played by women activists in peasant and working class movements. Let us now attempt a brief overview of some current debates that are significant to peasant and working class feminism in the contemporary scenario. 1.6 Current debates in peasant and working class feminism. Peasant and working class women are fragmented in contemporary India. Social strata based on caste, class, region proliferate the fragmentations. At the same time, they are facing the challenges of the retreat of the nation-state from social security. They are also becoming the victims of development-induced displacement that is driven by neoliberal ideology. Their political agency is repressed by the repressive state apparatus. The oppression of the Dalitadivasi women working class in Nandigram, Plachimada, Muthanga and so on demonstrate the brutal dimensions of the repression of their assertions. Identity politics and the NGOization of the social movements accelerate the gap that exists between the different sections of women. They think that leadership from their community can only address their issues in a positive manner. Thus, they are caught in a complicated gendered political milieu. The differences as well as solidarities symbolize the diverse ways of engendering democracy. 1.7 Summary. This unit tried to explore the intersections of peasant working class identities among women. It dealt with their struggle in the various movements in India and contribution towards the peasant and working class. We have critically analyzed questions such as what conflicts exist between peasants and ideological repressive state apparatus? Has male leadership in the peasant assertions movements addressed the question of women? These questions have been discussed by locating women's issues and concerns in the historical context of peasant movements. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.